When it comes to your retirement, do you want to have the same old plan everyone else has? Of course not. You're unique and have your own goals and dreams. Don't be treated just like a number. This is your retirement. So it's time to think differently. And you're in luck because you've found the Retire Your Way podcast with ILG Financial. At ILG Financial, you won't find generic, run-of-the-mill plans containing the same old cookie-cutter solutions. Dave, Chase, and the ILG Financial team focus on building one retirement at a time using their Think Differently philosophy. And that means your own comprehensive plan with customized solutions built to achieve just one goal, yours. So put on your Think Differently hats and get ready to take back control of your retirement today and for all the tomorrows to come. ILG Financial's Retire Your Way podcast was created just for you, and it's starting right now.
When it comes to retirement, do you want to have the same old plan everyone else has? Of course not. You're unique. You have your own goals and dreams. Don't be treated just like a number. This is your retirement, so it's time to think differently. And you're in luck today because you found the Retire Your Way podcast with ILG Financial. I'm Ron Stutz, and we're going to talk to Chase Lopez today. At ILG Financial, it is very important to remember that you're not going to find generic run-of-the-mill plans containing the same old cookie-cutter solutions. Chase and Dave and the folks at the ILG Financial team focus on building one retirement at a time, and in this case, it is yours. Today, we're going to talk about longevity risk. What is it, and how is it related to your retirement planning, along with some good ideas on how to age-proof your retirement plan. Chase, I hope you're doing well, and I'm looking forward to today's conversation.
Oh, absolutely. Always a pleasure to be on the podcast with you, Ron. And this longevity risk that we're talking about today is unique in that it probably applies to everyone out there, right? We talk about some topics every now and then that may or may not apply to folks, but this one in particular is going to span everyone out there that is building out their retirement plan.
I've heard it said that, the good news is you're going to live longer. The bad news is you're going to live longer.
That's absolutely right.
What in the world is that all about, and how do you relate that to your clients?
Yeah, so longevity risk, it's just something that either most people skip over or are just unaware of when it comes to their retirement planning and the different factors that are kind of taken into account. And the reason for this is because life expectancies continue to get longer. And interestingly enough, the number of centenarians is actually rapidly growing. And correct me if I'm wrong, Ron. I believe centenarian, that means people living over the age of 100. Mm-hmm. So this means that you could live a lot longer than you expected. And in turn, your retirement's going to be a lot longer.
Yeah. With that in mind, a lot of people out there, kind of lie awake at night, worrying about outliving their money. And do you find that is something that a lot of folks think about?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But the good news is, and that's what we're here to kind of talk about today, is it takes, you consciously, you, the listener, consciously taking some proactive steps to ensure that your money lasts as long as you do when you're strategizing, your specific retirement plan.
Mm-hmm. What can you do to make sure? What are some steps you can take to avoid that problem?
Yeah. So first, we're just kind of back up for a second and figure out how can longevity risk actually damage someone's retirement plan? Because really, whenever you're building out a retirement plan, first you want to figure out, hey, what's the problem? And, what do I do to kind of solve that problem? So you could deplete, your savings because of increased expenses or, an unsustainable withdrawal strategy, right? So when you're looking at your retirement plan, did you factor in a 20 to 30 year retirement, depending on the age that you retire and things like that? If you don't, right, living longer is a risk kind of multiplier is the way that we like to describe it. Meaning, as you live longer, you face additional risks, not just the simple fact that you're living longer, right? So inflation grows over time. Right. Mm-hmm. So that'll decrease your purchasing power over time. So the longer you live, the more inflation you will kind of endure over those lifetimes. So your nest egg needs to be large enough to cover your needs, no matter, I should say, how long you are exposed to inflation.
Well, as we all know, medical advancements have been amazing. They're keeping folks alive longer. And of course, with that, there is more money added to what you're going to need to cover your healthcare costs.
No, that's absolutely right. And, the reality is, and as you know, Ron, really, we specialize in helping folks that are in or near retirement. So we see this kind of play out every single day. The reality is, even though that life expectancy is getting longer, those last years, right? Those years that maybe you didn't have in a previous generation, that does not mean you're going to be young and spry during those years, right? And that's
sure.
just, yeah, that's what was the old Lion King phrase? It's a circle of life, right? So the older that you get, the more expensive your healthcare tends to get, which kind of makes sense, right? You're going to need some more healthcare, down the line. One thing that a lot of people don't internalize is about 80% of 65-year-olds will eventually need some sort of long-term care in the future. So that's, being in a nursing home or something like that. So it's definitely something that you need to prepare for so that that doesn't, take out your savings, down the line.
One thing that really strikes me is when I first started having conversations with anybody about longevity risk and about people living longer and all those sorts of things, that figure was closer to 70%. People are living so much longer these days, and that continues to move up, that it's about 80% now of folks who are going to need some form of long-term care before they pass away. It's amazing.
No, that's absolutely right. And as that life expectancy continues to get longer, right, which with medical advancements, it most likely will, right? Most likely life expectancy will continue to be pushed further out. That percentage of people that need long-term care is only going to go up, right? Because more people are going to be at this latter stage of their lives where they could potentially need this care.
Well, unless you're prepared to cover all those costs, your savings could just go away really quickly. And there's also the matter of, not only is there inflation, but healthcare costs, but also market volatility. And boy, we know as much about market volatility right now as we ever have.
So yeah, absolutely. Market volatility kind of contributes to this, longevity risk that people have. And the reason is there's constant upswings and downswings in the market, right? We're recording this on April 25th, 2025. And if you're listening to this around that time frame, then you're keenly aware that we're kind of going through this right now with the market volatility. The longer your lifespan, that just exposes you, especially in those later years, to some more market volatility, which could create some challenges for you if you have to pay for things like healthcare costs or deal with things like inflation, which we just kind of talked about.
Chase, let me ask you this. I mean, a lot of these things are really obvious, and this conversation we're having here makes a lot of sense. But why do you think so many retirees are unprepared for the risk that's involved with longevity?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of reasons for that. I would say the biggest reason, and this isn't necessarily anything having to do with finances, right? But generally as humans, we are optimistic people by nature, and that's against what probably most people think. But I say all that to say that it's tough to kind of think about those last few years, right? That's not really a happy thought to be having or a happy conversation to be having. So longevity risk is kind of a silent threat on your retirement because, so few people think that it's going to apply to them, right? The old saying, hey, it's just not going to happen to me, right? Kind of applies here. So, many underestimate how long they will live based on life expectancy or based on family anecdotes, right? So just because your parents didn't live long does not mean that you won't live long, or vice versa. Some retirees face longevity risk because they simply have not saved enough money, right? Yeah. So if you haven't built out a plan that does have that 20 to 30 year time horizon, built out, then that could be an issue, right? And even if you have that healthy nest egg, a poor withdrawal strategy or, an overly conservative investment strategy that doesn't grow over time could lead to, not having enough money in the future, this longevity risk. And then, lastly, some people just rely a little too heavily on Social Security, right? So that inflation and those healthcare costs come in down the line. And tying back to that, healthcare conversation, how expensive healthcare is, especially long-term care, I think people just underestimate, how much they're going to have to potentially spend in those latter years.
Yeah, and we're talking about, sometimes spending $10,000 a month or something on some kind of a private room in a nursing home. I mean, that's not chump change there. I mean,
well, and that's
a lot of money.
And that's today's dollars, right?
Yeah.
So think about this. If you are, planning out a 25-year retirement and it's $10,000 today, imagine how much it's going to be 25 years from now when you're actually going to need that care. And those are the conversations that you need to be having, with your financial professional.
And this whole conversation we're having today reminds me of the old, philosophy, and it's absolutely true that back in the day, planning for retirement was a lot simpler because people weren't living as long. A lot of people had pensions and everything else. These days, it is so much more complicated, and you need to do so much more work to make sure that you are covered during your retirement years. And that's why you need a financial professional like Chase Lopez or Dave Lopez.
No, absolutely. Well, and it's funny that you mentioned that, Ron, because we can look back at history, and this age group that's currently approaching retirement, they're the first age group to what we call self-fund their retirement. So I believe we talked about this in previous podcasts, but you couldn't have made a better point in that, the previous generation, when they were retiring with maybe 4 or 5 pensions. And those pensions were guaranteed as long as they were alive. So they didn't really have to worry about this longevity risk, right? Because the income streams that they had were guaranteed. Well, now that's not necessarily the case, right? People have to what we call self-fund their retirement, whether that be a 401k or something like that. So with all of these different variables kind of being in this cauldron, I guess you could say, you definitely want to be proactive in retirement planning to reduce this longevity risk and help kind of increase that security for your retirement.
Let me put your phone number out there for folks who may be listening to this podcast and thinking about, hey, I want to call him right away. That number is 540-720-5656, 540-720-5656 for ILG Financial. Or you can go to ilgfinancial.com anytime, 24 hours a day. How do you age-proof your plan? If you have a retirement plan already, call the folks at ILG Financial and get a second opinion for sure. But how do you go about age-proofing your plan, Chase?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different ways. So we'll talk about some strategies here in a second that, broadly apply to most people. But as we say with, kind of all of our podcasts, I would say if you hear anything, as we go through these that you haven't incorporated into your plan, then, that's a good indication, hey, I need to reach out to someone, right? Hopefully that's us because you're listening here today. But the reality is, right, you want to make sure that you have a financial professional looking over this stuff so, it doesn't kind of apply to you. So let's kind of jump in. We'll go through a couple of different strategies here to age-proof your plan. The first one is to make sure you build out a tax-efficient withdrawal strategy, right? You want to ensure that your nest egg is not drained too quickly, not only by withdrawals, but also by taxes, right? You don't want to be losing more money to taxes that you could potentially use in the future. Yeah. So you want to create that withdrawal strategy. You want to consider, your tax liability on those accounts as you withdraw those, rather than, setting up a percentage, right? There's an old rule out there. It's called the 4% rule. Mm-hmm. And, if you want to do a little bit of research on that, go ahead and, you can. But that's just really a rule of thumb. Really, you want to make sure that your specific plan is catered to, your specific strategy.
Yeah, and the 4% rule may not be appropriate today. That's for sure, because things have changed.
Absolutely.
How about diversity? And, we all want guaranteed income, but how does diversity figure into all that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we've all heard of diversification, right? And when we talk about it in the investing world, really what we're talking about there is, hey, instead of putting all of your eggs in one basket, sprinkle it across multiple baskets, so you don't put all of your money in, Apple stock as an example, right? Mm-hmm. You want to get all of the stocks out there. So just in case something happens to that specific company, that you're still covered, right? You're still invested in these other areas. Well, once you hit retirement age, you also want to diversify where your money is coming from, right? The income that you're receiving, where it's coming from. So if you don't have a pension, which, the majority of people don't, right? Or if they do, it's not enough to cover their living expenses. Yeah. There are ways where you can create a dependable income stream. So, a lot of people are familiar with annuities, right? That could potentially help depending on your situation. And there are other ways as well to, guarantee that income down the line for you. And these types of lifetime income streams will help you sustain your savings. And again, just add a, different element to your financial plan so that you can take this, longevity risk off the table.
You mentioned annuities, and I know a lot of people get a negative feeling when you say the word annuities, but we're talking about, there are several different kinds of annuities. And if you hear anything negative, they're probably talking about a variable annuity, and you're not talking about that, I'm assuming.
Yeah, absolutely. And remember, annuity, stock market, CDs at the bank, whatever the case may be, every investment tool out there has its own pros and cons, right? There's no, I always joke with clients, there's no silver bullet. There's no perfect way to do this. If there was, then it would be, a 10-minute conversation. And I would say, do X, Y, and Z, and you'd be fine, right? The reality is that there is, pros and cons to everything. So get with your financial professional because an annuity may or may not be the right fit for you, depending on your specific situation.
You need those dependable lifetime income sources to help sustain your savings and adding diversity to your portfolio is really important. But again, going back to that other topic we had earlier, long-term care is a big monster there waiting to take away all your money and,
I know it.
And deplete your savings. I mean, how in the world do you prepare for that in such a sustainable way?
Yeah. So again, I know we kind of sound like a broken record here, Ron, but there are kind of some different solutions for different folks, right? Depending on age and things of that nature. Long-term care insurance, right, may or may not be a fit for you. And really all long-term care insurance does is it's similar to like life insurance or car insurance, which is, you pay the premiums into the policy or to the insurance company. And then if you need long-term care in the future, then they will pay you, some sort of some dollar amount to help cover that long-term care. So maybe they say, hey, we'll pay $6,000 a month or whatever the case may be. So that's one way to do it. Some folks end up self-funding their long-term care, right? Mm-hmm. And just like we self-fund our retirement, they'll self-fund, their long-term care in the future. So you could do that in a variety of ways. A health savings account is one way that is tax-free if you use for medical expenses. So that's one, that could be one piece to the puzzle. Some annuities will pay out, more, right? If you go into long-term care. So they might say, hey, we'll pay you $2,000 for the rest of your life per month. But if you need long-term care, we'll pay $4,000 a month. So there's different ways to attack that. The first step is acknowledging, hey, I may or may not have a plan to address this. And then once you kind of acknowledge that you need a plan, then it can be built out, depending on your specific situation.
I think one really important thing for folks to remember is that, this is not something you just set up one time and you just, don't even think about it anymore.
Right.
A financial plan, whether it, encompasses all these things that we've been discussing here today, is something that needs to be adjusted along the way, maybe tweaked. And maybe it is time to review your plan right now. Even if you think you have a good plan, why not call Chase or Dave at ILG Financial and get it reviewed? Make sure that you're well taken care of in the future.
No, absolutely. And I think it's prudent for everyone to make sure that they're reviewing that plan often and making sure, we're talking specifically about longevity risk today. That risk can either be increased over time or decreased, right? Let's say, you were to come down with some sickness or something like that. Well, that's going to affect your longevity and your plan may need to be altered, as a result of that. So yes, absolutely get with your financial professional, regularly to make sure that these risks are being identified and there's a plan in place to be able to mitigate them.
Chase, it seems the big takeaway here today from this whole conversation is that addressing longevity risk early and preparing for the scenarios that are, things that happen just in case will help you confidently enjoy your retirement, knowing your nest egg is built to last and that you're not ever having to worry about lying awake at night, concerned about outliving your money.
100%. Longevity risk, it may not be completely avoidable, right? But it is manageable if you have a proactive strategy. Regardless of how long you live, it's important to have a plan that minimizes your tax liability, provides a sustainable income, and protects you against unexpected losses. So like we had mentioned before, get with your financial professional and make sure that you're set up for success with longevity risk.
Chase, this has been a really great conversation, and I think you brought up some things that folks really need to think about, and that's what a lot of these things that we talk about are designed to do. We want to make sure that folks end up with peace of mind.
Absolutely.
And the best way you can get peace of mind is by having all this stuff reviewed in your plan. And if you don't have a plan, get one. Talk to Chase or Dave Lopez at ILG Financial. Hey, Chase, it's been fun today and very informative.
Thanks, Ron. Always appreciate it. I always look forward to this whenever I see it on the calendar. So we'll talk to you next time.
Income, legacy, growth. It's all right here at ILG Financial, and it's been helping you plan for retirement your way so you can achieve your financial goals, whatever they are. Call ILG Financial at 540-720-5656. Or, of course, you can go online to ilgfinancial.com to learn more. And the Retire Your Way podcast is concluded for today. We appreciate your listening. I'm Ron Stutz along with Chase Lopez, and we will see you next time. The information provided is for educational purposes only and is not intended as investment advice for any individual or entity. All information contained herein is believed to be from reliable sources. However, we make no representation as to its completeness or accuracy. The views presented today are those of Dave Lopez and do not necessarily represent the views of the Alpha Star Capital Management, LLC. The opinions expressed are subject to change without notice and do not constitute financial, legal, or tax advice. Please consult your financial professional before executing any financial strategy. Investment advisory services offered through Alpha Star Capital Management, LLC, a registered investment advisor. Alpha Star and ILG Financial, LLC are independent entities. SEC registration does not constitute an endorsement of the firm by the Commission, nor does it indicate that the advisor has attained a particular level of skill or ability.